Hi everyone, I'm Zoya and welcome to Skating with Zoya. Have you ever wondered which paper works better for your artwork? You're in the right place. In today's video, we're supposed to talk about the different type of papers, so stay with us until the end and don't forget to subscribe if you enjoyed.
Generally, drawing papers can be categorized in a few different ways. One way is by the color, such as gray, black, white, and beige. Another important factor is the thickness, texture, and surface of the paper. For today's video, I've prepared a few different types of paper to show you the difference between them. I have 150 GSM, 350 and 120, and also a 200 GSM Fabriano paper. I'm going to test each one and show you how they feel when you actually draw on them. Let's start with the 150 GSM colored paper. I choose gray. I begin by shading with the pencil. As you can see, the pencil glides on the surface very smoothly, but it does creates a little bit of the texture. It's not completely smooth or flat like a printer paper. It has a very subtle texture that you can feel and see. Now I'm going to use completely clean brush to gently lift and soften the graphite from the surface. After lifting the graphite with a clean brush, you can see that it comes off very easily and smoothly. Now let's use a eraser to remove part of the graphite. As you can see, the eraser moves smoothly and graphite surface and removes it quite well. Next, I'm going to test a charcoal pencil, a black Conte pencil, to see how this 150 GSM paper reacted with the darker medium. As you can see, the contour pencil is also quite soft, and the black pigment shows up really well on this paper. It creates a nice contrast. I'm going to blend and lift some of it using a smaller brush. When lifting the charcoal, I wouldn't say it becomes 100% perfectly smooth, but the result is still very acceptable. When I erase it, you can also see that part of the charcoal can be removed from the surface, which means the pigment is not completely fixed into the paper. For the final test, I'm going to use charcoal powder. Powder usually goes on very smoothly, but the paper needs to have enough texture to hold the pigment and prevent it from falling off or looking patchy. Here you can see this paper is still feels smooth while keeping enough texture to hold the charcoal. It's also easy to erase, and you can clearly see the difference when removing the black pigment. The charcoal powder doesn't completely disappear into the surface of this gray paper, which gives you more control over your values and shading. The next paper I'm going to test is 200 GSM Fabriano paper. This one is a white paper with a completely bright surface. I'm going to repeat the same test we did before using a graphite pencil, a charcoal pencil, and charcoal powder. Then I try to remove part of each medium to see how they behave on the surface. This way we can compare with medium, create more contrast, which one shows a different texture and which one is easier to erase. Let's take a closer look at the 200 GSM Fabriano paper. As you can see, the charcoal powder doesn't sit on this surface as well as it did on the previous paper, and it doesn't show its full darkness or richness of color. That doesn't mean this paper is not suitable for charcoal powder. Many artists can still create beautiful artwork using charcoal powder on 200 GSM paper. However, you may need to build up the layer gradually and add more pigment step by step, which means it can take more time and effort to achieve a deep dark value. The next paper I'm going to test is 350 GSM paper. Generally, this paper is often chosen for medium like watercolor and some type of markers. However, I don't want to limit you by saying that this paper is only for a specific medium. I want to show you how its texture behaves and how it affects different drawing techniques. This paper has a much stronger texture compared to the previous ones. Depending on the subject and the style of artwork you want to create, this texture can actually be an advantage, especially for things like landscape or drawing where you want to create a more natural surfaces effect. When it comes to graphite, you can see that it creates a much stronger contrast. The value appear darker and richer on this surface. With a Conte pencil, even though the paper has a noticeable texture, it still feels smooth enough to work on. The pencil glides well and doesn't create too many harsh or unwanted lines. When I lift the pigment, you can also see that it creates a stronger effect because more material stays on the surface texture. Now let's test charcoal powder. Because this paper has a deeper texture, the charcoal powder gets trapped inside the small area of the surface. As a result, it creates a darker, richer finishing compared to smoother paper. However, when it comes to erasing, the result is not as clean as it would be on a smoother paper. Since the pigment settles into the texture of the paper, removing it completely becomes more difficult. Overall, this paper gives you stronger values, more texture, and a rich look when shading. But keep in mind that because of the texture, applying too many layers on top of each other can eventually damage the surface or the paper. The next paper I'm going to test is 120 GSM paper. This is probably one of the most popular chosen for drawing. It's easy to find, widely available, and also very affordable, which makes it a great option for many artists. When it comes to lifting and removing graphite from the surface, I would say this paper gives a very balanced result. It may not create the same level of the contrast as the 150 GSM gray paper, but it still gives you a good range of value. It is very recommended for beginners. It also doesn't have the strong texture of a 350 GSM paper, but it provides enough texture to work with these different drawing techniques. Overall, I would say this paper is a great all-around option because it's easy to find, affordable, and versatile. It's one of the best choices for beginners who are just started their drawing journey. To help you understand how different papers affect the final result, I decided to create the same type of drawing on different paper colors and textures. I want to show you how the surface, the color of the paper, and the materials we use can completely change the final look of the artwork. For this I start with black paper. When working on a black paper, we usually use a white Conte pencil to create a contrast and bring out the light areas. However, we are not limited to use only white. I also like to use black or even gray pencil. Because black Conte has a higher pigment intensity compared to regular graphite, it creates a deeper and richer black. This helps me create darker shadows areas and define the edges around the highlights more easily. As you can see, I'm using the soft black Conte pencil to blend and soften the transition, create dips, and build the form of the object. Then with white Conte pencil, I add the brightest highlights and the final touches of light. By layering both black and white pigments and gradually build up the value, I can create a realistic finish and make the sphere look three-dimensional. For the cast shadow on the surface, I'm using a black Conte pencil to create a soft and natural shadow. Working on black paper is a completely different and very interesting experience. I highly recommend trying it. It challenges you to think different about values and placement of the shadows because instead of creating everything from light to dark, you are building the form by carefully placing the highlights and controlling where the lights appears. So if you haven't tried drawing on black paper yet, I definitely recommend giving it a chance. The next paper I'm going to test is 150 GSM beige paper. I start by creating my initial sketch and then gradually build the shading. For the first layer, I use a B6 pencil to establish the values. Then step by step, I deepen the shadows while carefully keeping the highlight areas untouched. For the darkest value, I use a soft contour pencil to create richer blacks and a stronger contrast. One of the advantages of working on beige paper is that it's easier on the eyes because the contrast is softer compared to bright white papers. Now, as you can see, I also created the same drawing on 350, 120, and 200 GSM papers. The final results are not dramatically different from each other. The biggest difference is actually the feeling and the experience of working on each surface. For example, on a 120 GSM paper, because the surface is smoother, the Conte pencil can feel a little more challenging. It can create stronger marks and show more visible lines. So building up the layers needs more patience and a slower approach. And finally, these are the different finishes you can achieve by creating the same drawing on different type of paper. So in conclusion, every type of paper has its own unique qualities. Different colors, different texture, and different surfaces can all create different experiences while you are drawing. But at the end of the day, choosing the right paper depends on you, the artist, and what kind of artwork you want to create, as well as how much time and effort you want to put into your process. Of course, we all want our tools to make the process easier, but as artists, we can learn to work with different materials and create beautiful results on almost any surface. For those who are just starting their drawing journey, I would recommend this paper between 120 and 150 GSM in a different color. They provide a good balance of the texture and smoothness, create beautiful contrast, and work well with graphite, charcoal pencil, and charcoal powder.